Have you ever wondered why some books were simply ripped from sacred history? Why were texts like Enoch, which speaks of fallen angels, heavenly portals, and divine revelations, silenced for centuries? You may believe it or not, but what you're about to hear was once read by kings and forbidden for centuries. There's something deeply disturbing and simultaneously fascinating about the idea that the mysteries of creation were hidden not by chance, but by choice. Imagine opening an ancient manuscript, forgotten in some library of time. The pages are rough, the smell is of bygone eras, and the words whisper truths that institutional religion has tried to bury. The Book of Enoch is one such key. It speaks of a time before let there be light, a time when celestial entities observed the primordial chaos. And perhaps most disturbing, it reveals that not everything we call divine is what it seems. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you, and perhaps change the way you view the entire biblical narrative. We're not just talking about a forgotten text. We're talking about a spiritual map, forbidden revelations about the origin of evil, the role of the Watchers, and how these beings defied the Creator himself. Why was this hidden from us? And by whom? Have you ever felt like there was something missing in the stories you heard in church? Ever felt like there were gaps in the official explanation of creation? Then perhaps this video is the answer you've been looking for. Enoch wasn't erased because it was irrelevant, but because it contains something that shouldn't have been revealed, something that connects the beginning of time to the fall of the angels and to the nature of humanity itself. Feel this call, take a deep breath, and prepare to enter a sacred, dark, and profoundly revealing territory. Because what comes next could be the missing key. What if, deep down, you've always felt there was something wrong with the official version of history? Something unsaid but intuited, as if there were an ancient whisper coming from within, saying, there is more, much more. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe, like many of us, you've also felt this silent restlessness, this search for something that ordinary words can't reach. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what resonated most with you so far. What did you feel when you heard this? Have you ever suspected that spiritual truths were being hidden? Sharing your feelings may seem small, but in reality, they're huge. Because it's through your voice that we create this community of seekers. People who, like you, want to go beyond the veil. And if this journey resonates with something within you, enjoy this video now. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it helps this message spread further, reaching others who are also awakening. This is how we build a beacon in the fog, one click at a time. And if you feel this isn't an isolated discovery, but the beginning of something bigger, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a fragment of a divine puzzle. And this story, I promise you, is just beginning. You'll want to be here for the next revelations. Because when the forbidden books begin to speak, the silence of the past is finally broken. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because the question that echoes in the silence of centuries is simple, yet devastating. Why was a book cited by the Bible itself erased from history, not ignored, not forgotten, but deliberately hidden? This isn't just an academic curiosity. It's a sign, a trace of a hidden truth that someone, somewhere along the way, decided you shouldn't know. The Book of Enoch wasn't lost. It was excluded, handpicked to disappear from common reading. And most disturbingly, it is precisely this text that describes the behind-the-scenes nature of creation, the celestial conflicts that preceded the visible world, and the origin of evil as a result of a transgression not human but angelic. Enoch isn't just a side narrative. It's a threat to the dogmatic structure that was constructed to limit the reach of its spirituality. This decision to remove Enoch from history was not made by chance. It carries the weight of a choice to keep the people on the surface, away from the depths, because those who delve into these ancient texts begin to realize that there are layers to spiritual reality that have never been explored in traditional sermons. And this is where everything changes. When you realize that your faith doesn't have to be blind but can be investigative, intuitive, conscious, something changes. Imagine the impact of knowing that there were beings, called Watchers, who descended to Earth and directly interfered in humanity's destiny. Imagine discovering that the forbidden fruit wasn't just an apple, but a code, a transmission of knowledge that shouldn't be accessed, and that all of this was recorded, but kept out of reach. This isn't just a theological conspiracy. It's a struggle for control of humanity's spiritual narrative. Enoch reveals not only what happened before Eden, but why Eden needed to exist. He reveals that before let there be light, there was consciousness, and that this consciousness manifested itself in decisions, conflicts, and choices that resonate to this day in our most intimate doubts. How many times have you felt something was missing from the official explanation, that spirituality should be more alive? Enoch is that missing link, a fragment that gives meaning to what seemed incomplete. And the more you observe, the more you realize that everything was designed to keep our eyes away. Forbidden books, standardized doctrines, and a carefully orchestrated silence around certain names, certain events, certain places. The problem is that silence also speaks. And when you learn to listen to it, revelations come in waves. Some gentle, some violent, but all with the power to completely change your perception of spiritual reality. This is a journey. The journey of those who choose to see beyond what has been permitted, of those who sense they are facing something greater, more ancient, more true. Not a dogma, but a deep vibration that connects you to a purpose that cannot be taught, only awakened. Because once you touch this kind of truth, there is no going back. Comment here. That makes sense to me, and we will continue to uncover together what should never have been hidden. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because at some point you may have read or heard Jude 1 verse 14, that brief mention of Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesying of the Lord's coming with myriads of his saints, a passage that, curiously, is accepted, read, and revered in churches. But there's something strange about it, isn't there? If the name is there, if the quote is clear, why is the rest of his book never addressed? Why were you never told that this line is literally transcribed from the book of Enoch, a text considered apocryphal, forbidden, and labeled dangerous for centuries? This omission is no accident. It's part of a systematic mindset that separates what can be revealed from what must remain buried. There's a fine line between faith and control, between spirituality and blind obedience. And it's precisely in this gap that the book of Enoch hides. Not for lack of value, but for excessive impact. Its content is disruptive. It shakes the very foundation of what many have accepted as absolute. And this, for institutions, is unbearable. Do you realize the magnitude of this? We're talking about a text that has been part of Ethiopian tradition for millennia. It was used by early Christians. It even influenced the theology of New Testament authors. And yet, it was deliberately excluded. This leads us to an uncomfortable revelation. What is considered true is not always what was preserved, but what was permitted. This decision not to teach Enoch has profound implications. It shapes our perception of origin, sin, the fall, and redemption, because in the book of Enoch, evil doesn't begin with Eve eating the fruit. It begins earlier. It begins with celestial beings, the Watchers, who make decisions outside of divine will. They descend to earth, take human wives, teach sacred knowledge to humanity, and cause a cosmic rupture. This is not a fairy tale. It is a paradigm shift. It is a spiritual framework of creation, exposed in ancient words that echo to this day. And perhaps that's why the silence is so deafening. Because instead of being invited to question, we've been taught to fear, to avoid certain texts, to distrust anything that doesn't pass the scrutiny of established tradition. But true spirituality begins where automatic obedience ends. It begins the moment you allow yourself to immerse yourself, not just in what was said, but in what was left unsaid. This transformation of consciousness requires courage. It requires you to view faith not as a ready-made package, but as a living journey made up of discoveries, conflicts, and adjustments. Because, in the end, truth doesn't fear investigation. It only fears silence. And that's exactly what they did with Enoch. Silence him, because he shows that the behind-the-scenes of creation is much more complex and revealing than we've been told. And this is where your story intersects with his. Because if you're listening to this now, perhaps it's because the time has come. The time to reopen what was closed, to remember what was forgotten, to rebuild within yourself the bridge between heaven and earth. And this path begins with simple action, seeking, not with fear, but with presence, with awareness, with thirst for something real. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. And follow me on this dive into forgotten revelations. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what the book of Enoch does is more than reveal a forgotten detail. It reveals a scenario completely different from what we've learned about the beginning of everything. Before Eden, before the serpent, before the breath of life into clay, there was already tension. A silent war between celestial orders, between hidden purposes, between beings who had consciousness, power, and who made choices. Enoch doesn't just show us the creation of man. He takes us to a time when the heavens were in turmoil. Have you ever heard of the Watchers? Angels sent earth to observe, to guard, but who exceeded the limits of their design. Beings who, fascinated by humans, took women for themselves, taught occult knowledge, metallurgy, enchantments, astrology, cosmology, and forever altered the course of humanity. They weren't just disobedient. They broke with the original plan. They transgressed a higher order and opened doors that could never have been touched. This isn't symbolism. It's a literal description of the origin of chaos. This is where things begin to make sense. Because if there is an evil that precedes human choice, then the narrative shifts. Original sin ceases to be an isolated error in the garden and becomes a consequence of something greater, an infiltration, a corruption that began in the heavenly realms. This shift in perspective completely transforms the way we view guilt, redemption, and purpose. The book of Enoch, in this sense, is not just an ancient text. It is a spiritual lens on the behind the scenes of creation. And why does this matter? Because when you understand that there are active intelligences, conscious beings, making decisions outside of divine will even before humanity existed, you begin to realize that we are part of a history much older than we thought. We are not the beginning. We are a consequence. And this realization changes the mindset of those who seek the truth, because it shows that their existence is part of a cosmic line of impacts, choices, and consequences. These beings, the Watchers, were not merely punished. They were imprisoned, condemned to the abyss. There is no soft symbolism here. We are talking about entities that, according to Enoch, were sealed beneath the mountains until the day of final judgment, and their presence still resonates. Not physically, but in the structures they left behind, the systems they corrupted, the knowledge they planted. Some of the spiritual technology that fascinates us today, numerology, astrology, alchemy, carries traces of this forbidden teaching. The hidden truth here isn't just about what they did, but about why it was hidden. Because accepting this origin means admitting that there are layers of creation that have not been touched by light, that there is a time before time, a stage of reality that involves dramatic decisions, celestial betrayals, and a struggle for the fate of creation. Eden, in this context, is not the beginning. It is an attempt to restore a broken balance. It is a divine response to previous chaos. This changes everything. And when you understand that the beginning of humanity was preceded by an error, not human, but angelic, your own spiritual journey takes on new weight. You begin to see yourself as part of a process of restoration, not as the author of chaos. This is powerful. This is liberating. And this is what makes the book of Enoch so dangerous to the structures that try to shape faith based on fear, because it returns to humanity not only the blame, but also the right to understand its role as a piece of a much larger puzzle. Comment here. This changes everything for me, and we will continue to uncover what was hidden before the first ray of light. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we begin to understand the content of the book of Enoch, another question inevitably arises. If this text is so relevant, so transformative, why was it excluded? Why? Even though it is cited in the Bible, was it left out of the official canon? The answer, though shrouded in centuries of decisions and disputes, has something uncomfortably simple. Enoch was dangerous. Too dangerous for those who wanted to maintain control over the narrative of faith. During the councils that shaped Christianity as we know it today, Nicaea, Hippo, Carthage, men gathered to decide which texts should be considered sacred and which should be silenced. It was a choice, a cut, a line drawn between what would be accepted as divine truth and what would be labeled apocryphal, heretical, and questionable. And there, amidst those decisions, the book of Enoch was sealed, banned, not for lack of spiritual value, but because it contained something challenging. He challenged the imposed celestial hierarchy. He challenged the centralization of authority. He challenged the idea that all knowledge must pass through human intermediaries. And, above all, he challenged a simplified version of creation, evil, the fall, and redemption. Instead of presenting humanity as the sole cause of the divine rupture, Enoch exposed the spiritual undercurrents of error, conscious angels, forbidden decisions, and a heaven that had already been contaminated before earth even existed. This is precisely why these texts were considered dangerous, because they not only revealed new characters and events, but completely shifted the center of gravity of faith. They took power away from the institution and returned responsibility for the search to the individual. The hidden truth that pulses behind Enoch's exclusion is that there is, indeed, a spirituality that predates dogma, a divine consciousness that has always been accessible, but has been blocked by layers of fear, guilt, and blind obedience. This blockade wasn't just doctrinal. It was political, social, and spiritual, because controlling which texts you can and can't read is a way of controlling what you can and can't be. If you don't have access to complete revelations, you can't form your own vision of the divine. And if you can't form that vision, you remain dependent on leaders, on other people's interpretations, on rigid traditions that have often lost their meaning but retain power. Enoch, with his descriptions of the heavens, the abodes of angels, the judgment of the watchers, his almost cosmic language and cutting metaphors, didn't fit this mold. He disturbs. He breaks logic. He reveals that there is more, much more, behind the decisions that shaped Western spirituality. And that is why he was buried, not in the desert, but in the collective consciousness, in the enforced silence of tradition. When you access this text today, you are doing something almost revolutionary. You are returning to the breaking point and choosing to see what has been hidden. You are allowing your spirituality to be built on seeking, not passive acceptance. This requires a different mindset, spiritual courage, an inner transformation, because understanding why something was hidden is the first step to understanding the real impact it can have on your life. And if you've made it this far, you might already be feeling it. Maybe you've noticed a different energy when we speak of these forbidden truths. It's as if each word carries an echo, as if something ancient is being reactivated within you, not a memory, but an intuition, a calling. Write it down. I'm opening my eyes now, and we continue together, unearthing what they tried to erase from the history of creation. Now I want to go even deeper into the subject, because as you delve into the pages of Enoch, you realize that the book doesn't just suggest, it exposes. It reveals details that change the way you view evil, time, and even the structure of heaven. What was once a vague mystery transforms into a precise, powerful, and at times disconcerting narrative. Enoch is not a poetic or symbolic text. It is a testimony, almost a celestial report, of something that happened before the earth was shaped, before Adam, before Eden, before time began. What is recorded there is not just an alternative history. It is the very origin of the cosmic conflict that shaped everything that came after. The judgment of the fallen angels, for example, is not portrayed as an isolated episode. It is described as a public trial, held before Enoch himself, who was taken to the celestial realms to witness the sentencing of the Watchers, beings who, through their conscious choices, altered the balance of the universe. This is not a metaphor. It is a revelation of what is happening in the deepest layers of spiritual reality. These details aren't just intriguing. They have a real impact on how you understand your journey. Because if evil didn't get on earth, but in the celestial realms, then our pain, our suffering, our cycles, they're all part of a much more complex plot. We're not to blame for falling into a broken world. We are survivors of an ancient rupture. This shift in mindset is profound. It liberates. It restores spiritual dignity to those who have always been taught they were born in debt. Enoch doesn't stop there. He describes the structure of the heavens, divided into layers, with functions, hierarchies, and purposes. He speaks of rivers of fire that flow through the heavens, of stars imprisoned for disobedience, of dimensional portals that open at certain seasons, and of angels who guard the secrets of creation. All of this is written in a tone that suggests he's not speculating, but rather reporting what he saw. Because Enoch was taken, he was transported, and what he saw was too much for the world to accept, and that's where the key turns. because you begin to realize that what we call hidden isn't necessarily because it's inaccessible, but because it was deliberately hidden. The truth was always there, fragmented, scattered, sometimes distorted, but alive. And this text, however ancient, has a capacity to generate a very contemporary transformation. It breaks the chains of spiritual ignorance. You feel different after reading Enoch because it speaks directly to your intuition. It resonates with something ancient within you, as if part of your soul already knew all this and was just waiting for confirmation. The prophet's visions are not stories to entertain. They are maps of a world that exists beyond matter, beyond religion, beyond common language, a world that continues to operate, influencing, moving the invisible gears of what we call reality. And perhaps that's why so many feel a mixture of fascination and discomfort when they come across this book, because it doesn't just reveal, it demands, it confronts, it calls you to the responsibility of looking beyond the surface and understanding that your existence is not a coincidence. You are here now, facing this truth, because something within you asked for it. You are being touched by a spiritual memory that spans the centuries. Enoch changes everything because he uncomplicates what seemed too abstract and complicates what seemed too simple. He shows that evil is not simply the absence of good. It is the consequence of decisions. And that good, too, must be a choice, not an imposition. This creates impact. It invites awareness. It opens internal portals to a new way of seeing, feeling, and experiencing spirituality. Comment here. This changes the way I see the world, and stay with me as we uncover truths that have been locked away for generations. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when you begin to decipher the layers of the book of Enoch, something curious happens. Certain passages of the New Testament gain a new light. Verses that previously seemed isolated or symbolic begin to connect like pieces of an ancient puzzle. And it's no coincidence. Many scholars, theologians, archaeologists, researchers of the Judeo-Christian tradition have already recognized that Enochic thought permeates various moments of Scripture that, until then, didn't make much sense on their own. This changes the way we view the entire spiritual journey described there, because what seemed like a new beginning may actually be the continuation of something much older. The most direct reference is in the aforementioned Jude 1, verse 14, when the author mentions Enoch as someone who prophesied about the judgment of the wicked. But the echo goes much further. When Jesus speaks of the angels who did not keep their dignity and were thrown into everlasting chains, he is touching on reality accurately described in the book of Enoch. When he speaks of the fallen stars, the weeping and gnashing of teeth in deep darkness, the kingdom being taken by force, he is pointing to elements that are not mere parables, but symbolic keys to a forgotten tradition, purposefully kept out of reach of the majority. And this is revealing, because it indicates that Jesus, with a deep understanding of the Enochic tradition, accessed and transmitted truths that did not belong solely to the human realm. He spoke with an awareness of what existed before the foundation of the world, of spiritual structures that existed before Eden, and, most importantly, of beings who had failed in their heavenly purpose and were paying the price. This language, though often coded, points to a cosmic backdrop, a behind-the-scenes narrative rarely explored in modern preaching. The connection between Enoch and Christ is not doctrinal, it is dimensional. It arises when we understand that both speak of invisible realms, of eternal judgments, of light piercing the darkness. While Enoch witnesses the judgment of the fallen angels, Jesus presents himself as the one who will come to carry out that judgment. While Enoch describes 7 heavens and flaming thrones, Jesus speaks of many mansions in the Father's house, and of a kingdom not of this world. These are discourses that complement each other. They vibrate at the same frequency. They reveal that the story of redemption does not begin on earth, but in regions that escape our linear perception of time. This changes everything, because it reveals that Christ's mission was not improvised. It was orchestrated from before the foundation of the world. That his incarnation was the culmination of a spiritual battle that had been raging since the first acts of creation. That the birth, the cross, the resurrection were not responses to human error, but parts of divine strategy that already considered the prior rebellion of the celestial beings. And suddenly, the fragments align. John's apocalyptic language on Patmos, the beings with eyes all over their bodies, the thunder and lightning before the throne, the open books in the sky. All of this intertwines with Enoch's visions. The same Enoch who walked with God was raptured and witnessed things that could never be explained with ordinary words. We are talking about a man who saw time from the outside, who saw destiny as one observes a tapestry being embroidered by eternal hands. And perhaps that's why his words are disturbing, because they destabilize. They demand a new mindset. They invite you to be part of the journey back to the origin, not just of physical creation, but of spiritual creation, a return to the place where it all began, and where, deep down, everything is still being decided. Write it down. Now everything starts to connect, and we will continue to open the curtains on this scenario that has always been before us. But only now are we beginning to see with awakened eyes. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there comes a point where logic no longer suffices. When coincidences are too many, when patterns repeat themselves, when everything that seemed disconnected begins, silently and almost supernaturally, to align. Do you feel it? It's no longer just a curiosity. It's a calling that comes from within, but seems to echo from somewhere ancient, as if something or someone was waiting for the exact moment to remind you of who you are and of what you've always been a part of. What if the books of Enoch weren't forgotten by accident? What if this concealment was actually a protection, not in the sense of cruel censorship, but as a divine safeguard, placed there to preserve something sacred until the people were ready? What if you're hearing this now precisely because the time has come, the time to reopen the seals, to decipher the riddles, to touch a truth that never ceased to exist, but lay dormant until the collective consciousness could bear it? This changes the way we see everything, because we are no longer dealing with just an ancient book, but a spiritual artifact, a language portal, a sacred technology that, when accessed with reverence, reveals more than stories. It reveals structures, frequencies, cycles that govern heaven, earth, and everything else. The Book of Enoch was not written to be read in an ordinary way. It demands a different kind of reading, one that passes through the eyes but only reveals itself in the spirit, a reading that activates, that ignites, that reorganizes. And if you're understanding this now, it's because something inside you is already ready to awaken. It's not just about knowledge. It's about access. It's about spiritual memory. It's about breaking through the surface of faith and entering the backstage of the divine. Creation didn't begin with man. It began with sound, with vibration, with a cosmic decision, and before that with waiting, a silent expectation for this moment, the moment when the layers would meet again. When you look back at the erased text, the crossed out words, the missing pages, you realize you're not looking at a historical error, but at a code, a plan, a map that's always been there, but only now is it beginning to reveal itself. Not because we couldn't before, but because we didn't want to see it before. Truth demands responsibility, and perhaps only now are we mature enough to carry that weight. What if the books of Enoch were hidden not to hinder your faith, but to hinder its acceleration, to prevent unprepared souls from accessing portals that needed to be open with awareness, reverence, and maturity? Perhaps this is what we are experiencing now, a kind of collective activation, as if from time to time the heavens release a new wave of revelations, and those who feel the call know they can no longer go back to sleep. Nothing you've seen so far has been random, not even the timing of this content. What seemed like a coincidence may actually be a summons, a code answered, a memory rediscovered. You're not just seeking information. You're walking an ancient path. You're touching symbols, words, names, and opening doors that have always been there, waiting for someone brave enough to walk through. Comment here. I was called by this truth, and we move forward together because the next key is about to be turned. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized the value of this journey. And perhaps, like me, you also feel that certain truths don't just knock on the door. They reveal themselves when we're ready. Enoch isn't just talking about the heavens or the angels. He's talking about you, about the awakening of a consciousness that no longer accepts the same old answers. So, if this content touched you in any way, leave a like here, not out of vanity, but because it helps this message continue to resonate among those who are also searching. And if you felt this conversation open something within you, subscribe to the channel, because that's what we build together. A safe space to talk about things that have never been said. And there's much more to come. Oh, and comment there. I'm with you until the end, just so I know we're the ones who are really following this path until the last step. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and continue with me there, because the next revelation is already waiting.